Hey folks, in this episode I'm going to show you how to loop a noise texture mask in the shader editor. When you learn this method, you'll be able to loop any noise texture in Blender's shader editor. For this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make the noise texture loop system, and we'll use it as a mask to create these clouds. I will provide the Blender file on Patreon to all three members with all three examples, so you can download that and you can check out how I made the other materials if you like. So without further ado, let's get to it. So open up Blender. I'm going to delete the default cube. I'm also going to delete the default lamp. I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll hit Shift A, I'll go to mesh, and I'm going to choose an icosphere. I'm going to navigate to the bottom left until I've got my icosphere options down here. I'll then increase the subdivisions to 3. I'll just collapse the icosphere options. With this icosphere, we'll name this to Planet Base. I'll then right click and I'll click Shade Smooth. I'll then navigate to my modifier panel over here. I'm going to click Add Modifier, we'll go to Generate, and I'm going to choose Subdivision Surface. I'll keep the viewport at 1 and render it 2. I'll then navigate to my Material tab down here. I'll then click this button here and I'm going to choose the default material. If you haven't got a default material, just click New. I'm going to change the base colour to, let's say, a blue colour, maybe something around there, make it a bit darker, and I'm going to give a roughness of 1. I'll then navigate to the 3D viewport. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate that object. I'll then right click that in place. I'm going to go to wireframe view. I'll just zoom in. I'll then hit S to scale this up. I'm going to hold down Control and Shift, and that will scale it up in fine increments, just so it's a little bit bigger. And this object is going to be our clouds. So for this object, I'm going to navigate to my outliner and I'm going to rename it to Noise Texture Loop Clouds. I'm actually in my Layout View tab up here. So I'm going to take my cursor to the bottom left until I see a crosshair. I'll left click and I'm going to drag this up to open up a new window. I'll then click this button here and I'll change it from the 3D viewport to shader editor. I'll navigate over to my material tab over here. I'm going to delete that material. I'll then add a new material by clicking new, and I'll rename this to Noise Texture Loop Clouds. I'll then go to my render tab over here. I'm going to change it from Eevee to cycles. You can work in Eevee if you like, it should work absolutely fine. And in my shader editor, I'm going to hit N to hide the N panel, and I'll just drag the nodes over to here. Maybe I'll increase the shader editor window. So obviously this is going to be based on noise textures, so I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm going to go texture and we'll choose noise texture. I'll pop that there. I'm going to change it from 3D to 4D. For the noise scale, I'm going to set this to 2.5. For the noise detail, I'm going to set this to 12. The higher this number, the longer it will take to render, so just keep that in mind. If you've got a slower computer, I recommend starting at 4 to 8. For the noise roughness, I'm going to set this to 0.75. And for the distortion, I'm going to set this to 1.5. I'm going to connect the factor to the base colour, the principal BSDF, and I'll set the roughness to 1. I'll just now go into rendered view up here. We need to add a light in our scene, so I'm just going to hit Shift A and I'll go to light and I'm going to choose sun. I'll go to my outliner and ensure I've got the sun selected, and in your 3D viewport I'm going to hit numpad 3 to go into side view. I'll then hit R to rotate the sun lamp and I'll bring it around to something around there. Hit numpad 7 to go into top view. I'll then hit R and I'll rotate it to around about there perhaps. I'll just hit numpad 1 to go back into front view. I'll then reselect the noise texture loop cloud object in the shader editor. I'm going to hit Shift A and I'm going to go to input and we'll choose texture coordinate. I'll then connect the object socket into the vector of the noise texture. Okay, excellent. If we move this W factor, you can see that the noise pattern is changing, and we're going to utilize this to create a seamless loop. But in order to do that, we're going to need 2 of these noise textures. So with this noise texture selected, I'm going to hit Control Shift D, and that will duplicate the noise texture whilst maintaining the connection to the previous node. I'll then hold down Shift, right click and drag between these 2 noodles, and that will join these together. If that feature doesn't work for you, go to Edit, Preferences, go to Add-ons, and then search for Node, and then enable the Node Wrangler here, and then simply click this button and click Save Preferences. So with this control point selected, I'm just going to hit G, and I'm going to bring it down to round about there. I'll then select the texture coordinate, and I'll bring this down to maybe something around about there. I'll then hit Shift A, and I'm going to go Color, and we'll choose Mix Color. I'll pop that here. I'll then plug the colour from this noise texture into socket A and the colour from this noise texture into socket B. I'll then plug the result from this into the alpha of the principal BSDF. Maybe I'll just set the factor to 0. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go converter and I'll choose colour ramp, and I'll pop that in between the mixed colour node and the principal BSDF, And now if I drag these flags, you can see that we're starting to get alpha. So maybe I'll drag it to, let's say, around about there perhaps. The scene's looking a bit dark, so I'm going to go to my outliner and select my sun lamp. I'll then go to my light data tab down here, and I'm going to increase the strength to, let's say, 5. I'll then reselect the cloud object. I'm going to drag this flag across, drag this one across to something around about there, and maybe I can change the interpolation type on the color ramp from linear to ease. Now if we go to the mixed color node and change it between 0 and 1, or socket A and socket B, both of the noise textures are identical, so therefore we can take one of these noise textures and we can invert it, kind of like a mirror image, and then we can play out the W factor over a period of time on our timeline, and then truncate the timeline to repeat the sequence. It sounds quite complicated, but in reality it's quite an easy enough process to do. But before I continue, I'm just going to take my cursor to the bottom left of the shader editor until I see a crosshair. I'm going to left click and drag up, and that will open up a new window. I'll then change it from the shader editor to timeline, and I'm going to set an end frame of, let's say, 120 frames. You can set yours to whatever you like. I'll then hit N to hide the end panel, and I'm going to click home, and that will ensure that the entire timeline is displayed in the window. Maybe I'll just box select this control point. I'm going to hit G, just bring this a bit closer. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go converter, and I'm going to choose math. I'll change this from add to floored modulo, and what floored modulo will do, it will truncate our timeline to whatever value we set. So for example, I'll just hit Shift A, and I'm going to go to input, and I'm going to choose value, and for this value I'm going to type in 120 because we've got 120 frames. I'll then hit Shift D to duplicate, and for this one I'm going to add a driver, so I'm going to type in hash frame divide by 1, and the expression hash frame divide by 1 means that this value will increase for every frame. So if I go to my timeline and skip to frame 2, you can see that the value is 2, and the same is 3, 4, 5, 6 and so on, all the way until the end, which is 120. So I'll just skip back to frame 1, I'll plug this value into the top socket, and I'll plug this value into the bottom socket. I'll then plug the value from the floored modulo into the W factor of this noise texture. Let me just change this bottom value to, let's say, 30, just for example. So essentially what this is going to do, it's going to animate the W factor on this noise texture until it reaches 30 frames. And after 30 frames, it's going to take the W factor back to 0, and it will keep repeating the process. So when it reaches frame 60, it's going to take the W factor back to 0 again. But if I was to push play now, the W factor would be way too fast, so we need to slow that down. So I'll take this floored modulo, I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop it in here. I'm going to change it from floored modulo to multiply. I'm just going to bring this texture coordinate over to here. I'll then select this multiply node, I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop that down here. I'll change it from multiply to divide. I'll now plug the divide value into the bottom socket of this multiply node, and for the value on the bottom socket I'm going to type in, let's say, 100 for now. We might need to adjust this in a bit, and maybe I can set this top value to 0.05. So now if I hit play, you should see that it's animating a lot slower, but it's going to reset every 30 frames. Excellent. But I've got 120 frames on my timeline, so I'm going to change this value node to 120. I'll then duplicate that value node, so I'm going to hit Shift D, I'll pop that down here, and I'll set this value to 0.05, which is the same number here. I'll then plug this value into the top socket of the divide node. I think it's a good idea to name these value nodes so we know exactly what they are. So for this top value, I'm going to hit F2, and I'm going to rename it to hash frame divide 1. That's so you know the expression for the driver. And now with this second value selected, I'm going to hit F2, and I'm going to rename it to loop frame, and that's basically your end frame where you want your noise texture to loop. I'll then select this value node, I'm going to hit F2, and I'm going to rename it to speed, and this will be the speed of the rate of change for the noise texture. So if I hit play, you can see it's nice and slow, and maybe we can change it to 0.2, and it'll increase the speed. Excellent. It's still not looping yet because we haven't combined the two together, but we'll do that now. So I'm just going to skip back to frame 1. I'll just adjust the speed to, let's say, 0.1 for now. Now we need to apply this math to this bottom one. So I'm going to take this multiply node here. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop it down here. I'll plug the value from this multiply node into the W factor of the noise texture. I'll then take this floored modulo value and plug it into the top socket of this multiply node. And I'm going to take the value from this divide node and plug it into the bottom socket of this multiply node. So essentially, this is identical to this at the moment. If I was to play now, the animation of both of these noise textures would be identical because this is identical to this. Let me just box select these just to move them out of the way. So if you remember, we need to invert the animation for the W factor of this noise texture. So essentially, with this floored modulo, where we've got it set to 120 frames, what it's doing, it's animating the W factor between 1 to 120. So for this one, we want it to animate between 120 to 1, and that's easy enough. I'm just going to take this multiply node, I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop it in between the floored modulo and the multiply node. I'll just drag it down here for the minute, and instead of multiplying it, we're going to subtract it. And now we only need to subtract it by the original loop frame. So essentially what it's doing is counting down from 120 to 0, whereas this one is counting from 0 to 120, and then it'll repeat the process. The only thing left to do now is to blend these two together on this mixed color node, and again we're just going to take one of these math nodes, I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, I'll pop it down here, I'll then change it from multiply to divide, and we're going to divide it by the original floored modulo, which will go into the top socket, with the loop frame, which is the bottom socket. I'll then plug the value from this divide node into the mix factor of the mixed color node. So now if I hit play, we should loop seamlessly on frame 120. Excellent. And if we want to change the loop frame number, say I want it to loop on frame 60 on my timeline, I'll just change the loop frame here to 60, and now if I hit play, it should loop on frame 60. Excellent, seems to be working fine. Maybe I'll change the end frame to, let's say, 240. Okay, another thing I'm going to do is add a few value nodes to control the parameters of the noise textures, and the reason is because we want the values on both of these noise textures to remain the same at all times, otherwise the illusion is lost. So to do that, I'm just going to take this control point here, just going to hit G, bring this across to around about there. I'm just going to take these two math nodes, I'm going to hit G just to bring them down, just bring this across, and I'll bring this across. Don't worry, we're going to neaten this node structure up in a minute. Let's just add the value nodes. I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go input, and I'm going to choose value. I'm going to hover my cursor over the scale value on this noise texture. I'll hit Ctrl C to copy. I'll then take my cursor over to the value, and I'll hit Ctrl V to paste. I'll plug this value into the scale of this noise texture, and I'll also plug it into the scale of this noise texture. So now whenever I change the scale here, it should change on both of the noise textures. I'll then hit F2, and I'm going to rename this to noise scale. I'll then hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop that down here. I'll hover my cursor over the detail on the noise texture. I'm going to hit Ctrl C to copy and hit Ctrl V to paste. I'll then connect this value socket to the detail socket on this noise texture, and I'll connect it to the detail socket on this noise texture. And with the value node selected, I'm going to hit F2, and I'm going to rename it to noise detail. I'll then hit Shift D to duplicate that node. I'm going to type in 0.75 because the roughness is set to 0.75 on the noise texture. I'll then connect the value socket to the roughness socket on this noise texture. I'll also connect the value to the roughness on this noise texture. And with this node selected, I'm going to hit F2, and I'm going to rename it to noise roughness. I'll hit Shift D to duplicate. I'll hit F2, and I'll rename this to noise distortion, and the distortion value was 1.5, so I'll set this to 1.5. I'll then connect the value socket to the distortion sockets on the noise textures. I'll then select this noise scale node. I'm going to hit N to open up the N panel, and make sure that you're on the node tab up here. I'll then click color. I'll expand these options, and I'm going to choose maybe like a light blue color. And the only reason I'm doing this is so we can easily identify the controllers for this setup. Okay, I'm happy with that color. I'll then take my cursor and hover it over that color swatch. I'm going to hit Ctrl C. I'll then select the noise detail value node. I'm going to enable color, and I'll hover my cursor over that swatch and hit Ctrl V to paste the color. I'm going to do the same for this one, and I'll do the same for this one. Excellent. While we're here, I'm just going to select this value node with the driver. I'm going to enable color, and I'm going to choose a different color, maybe a green, something around there perhaps. I'll then hover my cursor over the color swatch. I'm going to hit Ctrl C to copy. I'll select this loop frame value node, enable color, hit Ctrl V, select this one, enable color, and Ctrl V. So these ones are the main controllers. So we've got our driver, our loop frame number, I'll set mine to 120 frames, and the speed of the animation. and the blue ones are the noise values. I'll just hit N to close the N panel. Before you move on, it's a good idea to save your project, so click File, Save As, and I'm going to save mine as like and subscribe. Thanks folks, you absolute legends. And then it's simply a case of hitting Save As. Before I continue, I'm going to tidy up these nodes just so it looks a bit more presentable and easier to read. You don't have to follow this step, but it's a good habit to get into. I'm going to enter full screen in my shader editor by hitting Control Spacebar, and essentially all I'm going to do is select a node. I'm going to hit G, drag them across, and with these 3 noodles here for example, I'm going to hold down Shift, right click and drag, and that will join those noodles together. Maybe I can box select all of these nodes here. I hit G, just bring them down to the median point, and that will also enable me to hold down Shift, right click and drag, hit G, bring these across. I'll do the same for this one, hold down Shift, right click and drag, I'll bring this down, and instead of having this one connected here, maybe I can hold down Shift, right click and drag the noodle point here. I'll then hold down Control, right click and drag, disconnect that, and then reconnect it back into here, for example. And then I can box select these noodles here. I'll then hit SX0. So I'm just going to continue doing this process. The only difference is I'm going to redirect some of the noodles onto the same rails but in different locations. So I'm going to crack on and do that. I'll speed the video up so you don't have to wait for ages, but if you want to see it in more detail, just slow the video down on YouTube settings. I'll get back to you in just a mo. Okay, that looks a lot better. It's good to keep things clean because when you come back to this later, it's easy to read instantly. You know that these green ones are for controlling the system, and you know that these blue ones, where they're a different colour, you'll know instantly that these are to control the noise textures. So there's one more thing we can do. I'll just hold down Control, right click and drag and disconnect the factor from the base colour. And now you can box select all of these nodes here. We'll hit Control J to add a frame. I'll then hit N to open up the N panel, and we'll give that frame a colour. And the colour I'm going to go for, maybe something around there perhaps. I'll then hit F2 and I'm going to rename this frame to Noise Texture Loop System, and maybe I'll increase the label size. I'll hit N to hide the N panel. I'll just box select these nodes here. I'm going to hit G, just drag them across just to ensure that these never go inside this frame. The reason that I've placed all of these nodes inside a frame is because this creates the noise texture looping mask, and we can use the result from this mask to create these clouds that we've done here, or we can use it to create abstract renders or anything else that we need a looping noise texture for. I'll just exit out of full screen view by hitting Control Space, and just for the final touch I'm going to hit G, just drag this across. I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Vector and I'm going to choose Bump, and I'll pop that there. I'll then plug the result from this mixed color node into the height of the bump node. I'll then plug the normal socket from the bump node into the normal socket of the principal BSDF, and that'll give us some bump. It's a bit strong at the moment, so maybe I can set the strength to 0.333. You could probably increase that a bit more. I'll just increase the 3D viewport. Okay, it's looking quite good. Maybe it's a bit swirly, so I'm just going to go to my noise distortion and set this to 1 instead of 1.5. Okay, that's looking quite good. So now if I hit play, you can see that it's animating. Excellent. I'm just going to go to my speed setting over here, and I'm going to change this back to 0.05. I'll then hit play. Excellent, we got a continuous loop. I'll just hit Control S to save the project, and with the cloud object selected, I'm going to hit numpad 1, numpad period, and that will center the view to the selected object. I'll then hit Control Alt numpad 0, and that will align the camera to the view. I'll then select the camera in the outliner. I'm going to go to my Object Data tab over here. I'm going to set the X location to 0, the Y location to, let's say, -7, and the Z location to 0. I've also got 90 degrees on the X and 0 degrees on the Y and Z. I'm going to go to my World tab over here, and I'm going to turn the strength all the way down to 0. I'm going to select the cloud object in my outliner. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate. I'll just hit S to scale it up ever so slightly. I then go to my material tab over here. I'm going to delete that material. I'm going to click new, and I'm going to rename this to Atmosphere. I'm going to select the principal BSDF. I'm going to hit delete. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go to shader, and I'm going to choose diffuse. Shift A, we go to shader and we'll choose transparent. Shift A, we go to shader and we'll choose mix shader. Shift A, we go to input and we'll choose layer weight. I'll connect the mix shader to the surface socket of the material output. I'll connect the diffuse shader to the bottom socket of the mix shader and the transparent shader to the top socket of the mix shader. I'll then change the colour from the mix shader to like a blue colour, maybe something around there perhaps. I'll then plug the facing socket from the layer weight mask into the factor of the mix shader. I'll navigate over to my object data over here. I'm going to scroll down until it says visibility. I'll expand these options. I'm going to scroll down some more and I'll disable shadow. Maybe I'll change the diffuse colour. Maybe I can change my planet base colour to maybe a green colour. In fact, I think that atmosphere is a bit big, so I'm going to scale it down a bit. So I'm going to select the atmosphere. I need to rename that object in my outliner. So I'm going to take my cursor and hover it over the atmosphere name with my shader editor. I'm going to hit Control C to copy that name. I'll then go to my outliner. I'll double click that object and hit Control V and paste that in there. And in my 3D viewport, I'm just going to hit S and hold down Shift to scale down in finer increments to, let's say, around about there perhaps. Just navigate over to my output settings over here. I'm going to enable render region. I'm going to scroll down, go to your output settings down here. Click this folder, choose the file location where you want to save your image sequence. Mine's in a folder called Level Up. Click accept. If you're happy with your end result, you can choose a file format of PNG. Usually I go for OpenEXR with a codec of DWAA lossy, and that will reduce the file size whilst increasing dynamic range. But just for this tutorial, I'm just going to keep it as a PNG, and then it's simply a case of hitting Control F12 and that will render out your image sequence. Join me on Patreon as a free member and you'll have access to this project file, which include these animated cloud mask loops and the 2 abstract noise texture loops that you're seeing on your screen. That's the tutorial in a nutshell. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please click like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. Have a great day, level up, and thanks for watching.